Hey, Warren here at the kitchen classroom. Gonna make some buttermilk biscuits today. This is a recipe that I've done hundreds, if not many more than hundreds of times, and put together over years and years. It's the way I do it. It's not necessarily the way anybody does it. It is not the way my grandmother did it, but it's what I like. So we're gonna start out here. This is 3 cups of white lily flour. This is not self-rising. This is just plain all-purpose white lily flour. White lily is a brand, but it is a soft winter wheat flour, a southern winter wheat flour. So it's lower protein. It makes for a softer, more delicate biscuit. Martha White is another brand out there. There are some other smaller brands. I do not like using self-rising flour. I feel like I want to control the leavening when I make a biscuit. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. So I try to abscond from using the white all-purpose flour, the self-rising flour, that is. So here we have 1 cup of just regular all-purpose flour. This is gonna give us a little more protein, a little more structure, so that our biscuit holds together while we eat it, doesn't crumble apart. Sometimes I may want a crumbly biscuit if I'm doing it to serve with some stew or chicken noodle soup or something like that. But for this, I want it to hold together so that as I bite through it, it doesn't just crumble apart. So the regular all-purpose flour helps bring our protein up a little bit. I change this ratio depending on what I'm doing with the biscuit. We have a tablespoon of salt, a tablespoon of baking powder, and a teaspoon of baking soda. And we have a whisk, and we're gonna whisk this all together. Now, if you wanted to sift it, you could. I don't really find there's any need for sifting these days. I feel like sifting was based on older school flour, where it was less well processed, much clumpier, also had a tendency to have weevils in it. You get those things out. So I just like whisking everything together, gets it all mixed in, and takes care of what we need to get done. So that's all together. We have here a box grater. This is how I like to incorporate my butter into the biscuits. You can do it where you chop it up and smash it with your fingers and make sort of flats. That takes a lot of time, sort of a little harder on the hands. And you also add a lot of heat from your hands into it. This way I get these nice long strands, help form the layers I'm looking for in the biscuit. And it's a really simple way to do. So my butter has been in the freezer for a few minutes. I don't want frozen butter. If your butter is frozen, you're gonna get little nubs. So I want like 5 to 10 minutes at most, just enough to sort of differentiate with the heat from your hand so you don't melt as fast while you're grating it. So we're gonna get all the butter in there, get some flour on it, get some flour on our box grater here, and we're just gonna do slow, steady grates here. Looking for, again, sort of longer strands. If the butter comes apart, it's okay. Just going to be careful not to grate too hard or too fast so we don't catch our finger in there. I do consider box graters to be a little dangerous as a kitchen tool, but it's also highly useful. So you can see here, we're getting nice strands of butter, not little nubs. They're going to break up a bit, but still be strands by the time we get going. So if it gets a little dry, we can toss some flour on the strands, keep them separated. Now this is 12 tablespoons of butter. So we have 4 cups of flour, tablespoon of baking powder, tablespoon of salt, 12 tablespoons of flour, teaspoon of baking soda. And that's my basic recipe. So we'll get all that butter out of there. That's looking good. And we're gonna just toss this together with our hands, being gentle, not trying to break up the strands. Now, if you wanted to add some cheddar cheese or some herbs or something, do some cheddar chive biscuits, this would be the good point. You'd want to add that. Get it tossed in with the flour as well. This is the point where pretty much every time I get flour on the door of my fridge because I want to get the buttermilk out. Buttermilk kept cold until ready to use. We are trying to maintain temperature here on the lower side. I have a big rubber spatula, silicone spatula, and we're just going to dump this in all over. Don't need to make a well or anything. 2 cups of buttermilk, that's the general ratio, half as much buttermilk as flour. I usually put a little extra in just in case it's a little drier today, so we don't quite finish what's in there. We're gonna get this mixed together. We're gonna use this spatula until it comes to the point, you'll just know, it's just like this isn't doing anything. The flour is, moisture is reasonably incorporated. This takes a minute or two. Definitely don't want you stressing out about your biscuits. They're gonna turn out delicious. They may rise a little more this time than next time. It may be a little different. I think over time, you'll get to know the recipe and they'll sort of turn into your biscuits. As I say, I tried for years to make my grandmother's biscuits and never could quite make them like she did. You can see this is a little dry, and again, I didn't use all the buttermilk I measured, so we're gonna come back in with a little bit, trying to hit the drier spots. Now it's also going to absorb moisture over time, so we don't want to get it too wet because there's going to be some absorption as it sits and we start working with it. So that's sort of a shaggy dough. It's not really doing much now. So I'm going to get some flour down on the board and we're just going to scrape this out in. See, the bowl came out pretty clean, which is nice. Use the bowl to get it off our spatula. Now we're gonna come in with our hands, and we're gonna start bringing it together. We're not really gonna fold. I don't like getting those curved layers in, so we're just gonna sort of smush it and press it together. Doing a nice job. Not really trying to make any layers at this point or make any curves and moves. Probably still a little dry, but it's gonna be fine. We're gonna work that out now that it's mostly together. Just gonna flatten it out with our hands. You can use a rolling pin. I don't have any objection to it, but I don't need it for this size batch. I'm gonna give it a cut and a fold. I'm gonna turn it over regularly. We wanna keep moving the dough around, not just work it in one place. This makes sure it doesn't stick, and if it sticks, it won't spread out evenly. So we're gonna flip it over some. If we needed more flour, we'd add it. We're gonna work it back out, and we're gonna give it another cut. So this is like 4 layers. A little extra rise from the cutting and the layering. Gives a nice shape to it. Also, we're sort of working it out into a rectangle to help with the cutting later, make it we get more evenly cut. Now we usually go for about 1 inch thick. You can go thicker, you can go thinner. They're gonna bake a little different. Again, it's what you wanna do with a biscuit. If you want a big fluffy biscuit, you can leave it a little thicker to start. You don't usually want to go too thin though, because once it gets certain thinness, it doesn't really rise as much, even though it'll double in size sometimes. Cut it too thin, it won't really rise for whatever reason. So that's looking pretty good. We're gonna grab our baking tray. I like to use a simple, basic tray. This is aluminum. I like a silver one, not a black one. Black ones cause too much heat to come through and you brown your bottoms too much. I'm using a square cutter. It's my personal preference. Helps me get the most great cuts, less scrap. And this is about a 3-inch square, I guess this time. I have a whole box of the square cutters. If you're getting the square cutters, definitely get the plastic ones. I don't often recommend plastic, but the metal ones never really hold their shape just because there's no structure keeping the metal from bending. And that's our even dozen biscuits, and we're gonna go in the oven. 475 degrees on the bottom rack. Now, everybody's oven's different, so you may need to be higher temperature or lower temperature. You may need to put it on the upper rack if the bottom's brown too much. You're gonna learn that on your first biscuit. I always recommend on your first batch, set it at 475 degrees, put your rack in the middle, put your biscuits in. It's gonna be 10 minutes. We're gonna rotate them 180 degrees for another 5 minutes, and we're gonna check they're done. The goal is to have the bottom and the top of the biscuit at the same level of brownness. And if they aren't, we're just gonna mess with it a little bit. And you'll say the next batch, maybe, hey, my bottoms didn't brown, so I'm gonna put it on the lower rack, or my bottoms brown too fast, so we'll move it to the upper rack. It really just depends. All right, so we've done 10 minutes. We're gonna give these a 180-degree spin. Come out, just rotate them right where they are, and right back in, and set it for 5 minutes. It should be done at that point. So coming out of the oven, biscuits are done. So what we're looking for here is, see, we didn't put any butter or parchment down. It's just not needed. The biscuits don't really stick because of the amount of butter in them. We're looking at the bottom here and the top here being about the same color, but what we want to see, and we want to open it up and not see any doughiness. That's perfectly cooked. Nice, tall, fluffy biscuits. Couldn't be happier with this batch. Pretty excited to have these here. You see your spatula just in case they stick a little bit, but they're all really loose. You can see our 8 perfect cuts, a little 2 that were put together, and our little chef's biscuit. But, you know, pretty great.